There are worlds that die in silence, their final prayers swallowed by the void long before any distress call reaches terror. On such worlds, the Emperor's light flickers like a dying candle, brief, defiant, and forgotten. It is here that the true measure of a space marine is revealed, not in triumph, but in endurance. Not in victory, but in the refusal to break before the weight of the oath. The chapter that held the line on Lorne's Reach was never named in Imperial records. Their heraldry was scorched from banners, their deeds erased by decree. But among the scattered remnants of the Astra Militarum, there are whispers still of the red-armored sons who did not retreat, even when the sky itself bled. When the first bombardment fell, it tore the Manufactorum plain into fire and dust. Vox traffic died in bursts of static and screams. The last transmission from the planetary command bunker was a single, ragged breath. "They are already within the walls." The surviving serfs believed they heard chanting beyond the explosions, something between a litany and a curse. The invaders were never named, but the nature of the destruction spoke of the warp. Brother Captain Malchior watched his fortress monk bastion burn from the parapets. Around him, his warriors knelt in the ashes, heads bowed in prayer. Their chaplain's voice echoed through the smoke, each syllable heavy as iron. The oath does not end in survival. It ends in silence. No one questioned him. The Emperor had no need for cowards. In the ruins below, servitors stumbled through wreckage, clutching melted data slates, trying to preserve fragments of the chapter's archives. They recorded only fragments, names without deeds, dates without context. Yet those fragments endured longer than any of the men who wrote them. The first breach came at dusk when the shadows lengthened and the air itself turned bitter. The defenders met the heretic tide in corridors that glowed red with warning runes and molten ceramite. Every swing of a chainsword was answered with the roar of bolter fire, every prayer drowned by the shriek of steel. Through it all, Malchior stood unmoved. His armor was cracked, his heart nearly still, but his oath held him upright. Outside, the Manufactorum spires collapsed one by one, throwing molten debris into the storm. From orbit, the battle might have looked like a wound opening across the planet's surface, bleeding light, screaming until silence. But on the ground, each moment stretched into eternity. Brothers fought beside brothers until their gene seed bled dry, until even their vox grills failed to carry their final prayers. When the last line fell, Malchior did not flee. He walked into the fire. They say his armor turned white with heat before the end, and that his final words were a whisper into the burning air. The oath is fulfilled. None lived to confirm it. Centuries later, when an adeptus mechanicus recovery fleet arrived to reclaim the wreckage, they found only silence. The fortress had fused into black glass. Data spirits refused to awaken. Not even the servitors remembered their purpose. Yet in the catacombs beneath the ruins, the tech priests found one object untouched by decay, a single, unbroken purity seal pressed against the scorched wall. Its wax still bore the faint impression of an imperial aquila, and beneath it a single line of script. We endure so that others may remember. In time, Lorne's Reach was declared lost to the warp. Its coordinates were purged from the star maps, and no pilgrim was ever allowed to approach. But among the voidfarers of the segmentum obscurus, there are those who swear they have seen the red-armored warriors walking across the stars, their forms half light, half ashes, guarding the borders of forgotten systems, eternally silent, eternally bound. Perhaps it is only a tale told to frighten young deckhands into prayer. Or perhaps some oaths are heavier than death itself, and cannot be broken by any hand, mortal or divine. The galaxy does not remember their names, but the Emperor does. And that is enough. There are worlds where the air itself remembers the prayers once spoken upon it. Lorne's Reach became such a place, a graveyard of faith. Centuries after the fortress burned, the ash plains still whispered beneath the wind, carrying echoes of litanies spoken by men who had long since turned to dust. When the pilgrim fleet Sanctus Veritas broke warp above the system, its crew saw the planet below shrouded in storms that glowed faintly red from within, like embers beneath a dying hearth. The augurs returned no life signs. Vox contact failed. The captain, a devout son of the Ministorum, believed it an omen, a test of faith. He ordered descent. The ship's landing craft cut through lightning-racked skies, leaving trails of white fire as they pierced the atmosphere. As the pilgrims disembarked, they found no ruins, no bones, only black glass stretching to the horizon. When their boots touched the surface, the sound was like the cracking of ice on a frozen sea. One of them knelt and brushed the ash with trembling fingers, whispering a prayer for the dead. The ground answered with a low, hollow hum, as though the planet itself breathed. Among the pilgrims was a confessor named Varin. His voice, once a weapon of the pulpit, faltered in that vast silence. He had come seeking relics, proof that the Emperor's hand still reached even to this forsaken place. Instead, he found a silence that seemed to listen. At night, when the storms quieted, he swore he could hear distant footsteps echoing through the wind, the tread of ceramite boots on stone. The others mocked him at first, but when the third night came, they heard it too, a rhythm deliberate, measured, the pattern of a battle march. They followed the sound across the plain to what had once been the fortress monastery. The structure was half buried, a black scar against the horizon. Its gate stood open, though no power source remained. Inside, the air shimmered faintly as if memory itself resisted intrusion. The pilgrims descended into the chapel halls where statues of space marines stood melted and deformed by fire. Their faces were gone, their inscriptions erased, yet each seemed to kneel as if in penance. The walls bore marks that were not caused by weapons, patterns like fingers dragged through molten stone as though something had clawed its way out. Confessor Varin approached the altar. Beneath layers of fused ash, he uncovered a cracked reliquary. Inside rested a book, its pages burned to near dust, its binding sealed with wax that bore the faint outline of an aquila. When he touched it, the seal broke with a sound like bone splitting. The pages within did not crumble. They bled. Varin fell to his knees. The text was not written in low Gothic or high, but in a language of symbols that seemed to shift when looked upon. He could not read it, but he could feel it, a pulse beneath the words, a rhythm like a heartbeat. He ordered his followers to withdraw. None obeyed. One by one, they began to whisper the symbols aloud, voices trembling as though repeating a prayer they did not understand. When dawn came, the chapel was empty. Only Varin remained, kneeling before the altar, his eyes burned white and his mouth still moving in silent recitation. The Sanctus Veritas waited in orbit for 3 more days before sending a recovery team. They found the ship's Vox logs filled with static and one repeated fragment broadcast every hour on the hour. The oath endures. The ecclesiarchy sealed the system once again. The Sanctus Veritas was declared lost in warp translation, but fragments of the recovered recording leaked into the archives of the Ordo Minoris Hereticus, where it was studied under censure. The conclusions were inconclusive, but one phrase recurred in the margins of every report. Faith is not light. It is heat, and so the legend grew. Pilgrims whispered that the sons of the forgotten chapter still walked the surface of Lorne's Reach, their forms made of flame and vow, bound to the ashes of their faith. Some claimed that if you spoke an oath beneath those red storms, the air itself would answer, and if your heart was impure, it would burn you alive. No Imperial agent has returned to verify this. Perhaps none will. The Inquisition has no need to disturb the dead when the living are already so willing to believe. Above it all, the storms continue to move across the world like drifting cathedrals of fire. And sometimes when the light of distant stars catches the planet just right, it gleams, not like ruin, but like armor. For faith, once burned, never truly dies.
It only waits for breath.
In the far reaches of the segmentum obscurus, there is a world that does not appear on Imperial charts. It is not hidden by warp storms or xeno-sorcery, but by deliberate omission. The Administratum calls it Orphean Null, though those who remember its true name whisper it only as a curse. It was once a proud forge world, its manufactoria stretching from pole to pole, its skies choked with the smoke of endless production. Now it stands silent. When the last astropathic message escaped its surface, it contained only 3 words. The work continues. No transmissions followed. No ships emerged from its docks. Explorators who approached found the orbiting shipyards empty, the forge fires cold, and the vox channels humming with faint metallic whispers, repeating themselves in perfect rhythm, like the breath of something immense and unseen. The mechanicus declared a red quarantine. Yet, within the cult mechanicum, rumors spread of a deeper truth, that the forges had achieved a form of auto-sacrament, a process where machine and faith had become inseparable. The Magi of Mars dismissed it as superstition. But superstition, in the Imperium, is merely unmeasured truth. When the explorator vessel Omniscient Clarity broke the quarantine decades later, it descended through the planet's atmosphere like a silver drop into oil. Beneath the haze, the surface stretched in endless grey plains, cut by the skeletal remains of manufactoria, whose chimneys still exhaled faint heat.
No life signs registered.
Yet the Auspex read constant, synchronized movement below the surface. Millions of signatures marching in perfect lines, circling the planet's core. Tech priest Dominus Vala led the descent. He was a creature more machine than man, his face a lattice of red lenses, his voice filtered through layers of vox distortion. When he stepped upon the ground, his mecha dendrites twitched as though reacting to an unseen frequency. He whispered the canticles of awakening and commanded the ground to yield its secrets. The earth answered. A deep vibration rolled through the plain. The dust parted like water, and from below they rose, rows upon rows of figures, uniform and immaculate, their faces hidden behind respirator masks corroded by time. Once human, now little more than husks encased in iron. Servitors, tens of thousands, they did not attack. They simply marched past the explorers, past their ships, in an unending procession toward the horizon. Their footfalls shook the ground in perfect rhythm, as if obeying a signal that had never ceased transmission. Each carried a fragment of a broken weapon, a gear, or a tool, offerings of labor to a master no longer present. Dominus Vala attempted communion through Binharic code. The response came instantly, a pulse of pure binary that overloaded half the expedition's cogitators. One phrase was discernible before the systems burned out. The Omnisire watches. They followed the servitors for days, tracing their march to a canyon carved straight into the crust of the planet. It descended for miles, walls lined with the remains of cogitator banks fused into the stone. At its base stood a colossal figure, a statue, or perhaps not. It resembled the form of the machine god. The Omnisire made manifest, yet its features were indistinct, as if shaped by thousands of different hands with different faiths. Around its feet, the servitors knelt, placing their offerings in perfect sequence. When the last had done so, a low hum filled the air, and the planet's core seemed to pulse in response. Lights flickered across the canyon walls, not mechanical, but organic, like veins awakening beneath metal skin. Vala fell to his knees. For the first time in centuries, his flesh felt warm. He raised his voice in the hymn of unification, and the servitors echoed him, not through mouths, but through the vibration of their bodies, their limbs resonating with the same frequency. The entire world became a choir. It was then that Vala saw movement in the shadow of the statue. Something vast and humanoid stepped forward, not entirely mechanical, not entirely flesh. Its eyes burned with red light, and its voice was both vox-distorted and deeply human. "You have come late," it said. "The forge is already sanctified." Vala, trembling, asked its identity. "I am continuance," it replied. "I am the work." And then the lights went out. When the omniscient clarity departed the planet days later, it carried no living crew. Only data logs remained, endlessly repeating the same phrase transmitted through the ship's auto-vox. "We are the march." The Ordo reductor later recovered fragments of the transmission and sealed them in the vaults of Mars. No one has dared reopen the quarantine. The forges of Orphean Null still glow faintly red in the void, casting light upon nothing, humming softly in eternal rhythm. Perhaps they march still, below the surface, in silence, working not for empire, or emperor, or creed, but for the act itself. For in the Imperium there are worlds that have forgotten why they labor, and worlds that have remembered too well. And so the silence spreads, as sure as faith, as endless as machinery. They say that every soul in the Imperium hears the Emperor's will in a different way, some through dreams, some through madness, and some through the hollow quiet between the screams of dying worlds. I used to believe the Astronomicon was only a light in the warp, distant, mechanical, a thing of cold function. But on the voyage back from Orphean Null, I learned that faith is not merely belief. It is contagion. The ship drifted for weeks through the void, its Geller field trembling like the skin of something alive. The warp was uneasy. It pressed against the hull with voices that did not belong to demons or echoes of the lost, but to men, voices of tech priests chanting in perfect binary, workers reciting the litany of labor, pilgrims whispering praise through torn lungs. All of them merged into a sound that felt less like noise and more like breathing. The breath of a dying god. When the astropath screamed, no one went to silence him. We listened. His cries became rhythmic, like pulse beats of light within the darkness. He was not dying. He was transmitting. Through him, something ancient spoke. He endures. Those two words reached across the ship, and even the servitors paused mid-task, their augmetics flickering as though in reverence. Some of the Skitari guards dropped to their knees, repeating the phrase like prayer. The Magos commanding the vessel tried to record it, but every data slate corrupted, every cogitator looped the same fragment until it overheated and burst. The message had no source. It was not sent. It was. When we finally emerged into real space, the stars looked different. Duller, perhaps, or more weary. The Astronomicon burned faintly in the distance, its light flickering through clouds of warp storms that should not have existed. And there, for the first time in my life, I felt as if the Emperor's beacon did not merely guide us. It watched. We made for terror, though none of us spoke aloud why. The ship's machine spirit grew erratic, refusing to obey course corrections. It was as though it knew where it was being called. The Magos fell into silent communion for days, his mind lost to the frequencies whispering through the ship's walls. When he returned, his face was changed, not in flesh, but in the way the light caught it, as though his skin remembered divinity. "We are being summoned," he said.
The throne has need. Those words froze the blood in us all.
To be summoned by terror was death or sanctification, sometimes both. When we entered the Sol system, the machine spirits of every weapon and thruster fell silent in reverence. The void itself seemed hushed, as though the sun feared to speak before its master. And then I saw it, the golden sphere of the palace, haloed in the dying light of the Astronomicon. Around it hung the hulks of ancient vessels, drifting tombs of the Great Crusade, their hulls covered in scripture too vast to read. They orbited the throne like corpses still kneeling in prayer. Our ship was not permitted to land. Instead, we drifted among the fleets of penitence and pilgrimage that encircled holy terror like rings of devotion. Billions of voices chanted through open vox lines, forming one ceaseless hymn that stretched from orbit to atmosphere to ground. The Magos interfaced with the nearest custodian relay. When he disconnected, his metallic limbs trembled.
"They have no record of our summoning," he whispered.
No order was given. But the ship continued moving, not by thrusters, but as if pulled by unseen gravity, drawn toward the planet's pole. We descended into the golden light until the clouds swallowed us whole. Lightning flashed in the shape of the Imperial Aquila, and I thought for a moment that the planet itself was alive, its storms forming veins of holy fire. We came to rest upon a plateau of marble that had no end. There was no wind, no horizon, only mist and silence. I could feel it then. The same pulse from Orphean Null, the same breath through the void. It emanated from beneath the world itself. In that silence, a voice spoke, not through vox or thought, but through meaning. "You have seen the work." I fell to my knees. "My lord," I said, though I saw no form, "what are we to do?" The silence deepened, pressing upon my mind until I thought it would break. Then came the whisper, softer than death, "Continue, I do not remember leaving."
None of us do.
When we awoke, the ship was again in orbit, terror fading behind us. Our memory of the surface was fragmented as though erased by mercy or design.
Only the echo remained. That word. Continue, and so we did.
We rebuilt the forges, reactivated the servitors, and sent new prayers into the machine spirit. Yet each night I dream of that breath beneath terror. The same rhythm as the forges of Orphean Null. The same heartbeat as the Emperor's dying flame. Perhaps it is one and the same. Perhaps the throne is not only his tomb, but his forge. And perhaps we are not his servants, but his instruments, the tools he wields even in death. There are whispers among the Magi now. Quiet, heretical thoughts shared in binary code too faint for the Inquisition to hear. They say the Emperor's flesh is cold, but his will has passed into the circuits, the cogitators, the steel. They say he dreams through the hands of laborers, through the servitors that never stop their work. I once would have called it blasphemy. Now I call it mercy. For if he still endures, not in the heavens, not in light, but in the endless hum of machines and the breath of the dying, then perhaps the Imperium has not lost him at all. Perhaps the Emperor has become what he always was meant to be, not a man,
Not a god.
a process, eternal. And when the day comes that the throne's light dies entirely, and the Astronomicon's last flicker fades from the void, I believe the silence that follows will not be empty. It will hum, it will march, It will continue. They say the Astronomicon has never gone dark, that its light burns so fiercely it can be seen from the farthest edge of the void, brighter than any star, purer than any sun. But those who have watched it long enough know that it flickers.
Every few centuries it falters, for a heartbeat.
A whisper, and the warp sighs with hunger. When it flickered last, I was there. We had returned to the Orphean system, now a wasteland of broken moons and forge husks. The once living world, Orphean Null, no longer sang with machines. Its forges had cooled. Its rivers of metal had turned to rust. What remained was silence, not peace, but exhaustion. Even the machine spirit seemed to mourn. Our ship hung above the world like a relic over a grave. The Magos who had once spoken of the Emperor's summons was now little more than a mind trapped in steel, his human voice replaced by static. Yet even he knelt before the viewing glass when the Astronomicon dimmed. "It is not death," he whispered. "It is breath." The light pulsed once, faintly, then steadied. But I felt it then, deep in the marrow of my bones. Something vast had shifted. A tide had turned. The light was no longer merely guiding ships. It was calling something home. On the surface, we found the remnants of the forges we had once tended. The ground was littered with the corpses of servitors who had continued working long after the forges died, polishing rust, praying to silence. Their eyes were dark, but their hands still moved, endlessly repeating motions of service. We found a vault beneath the ruins, sealed by seals of both the mechanicus and the ecclesiarchy. Within it I expected relics or forbidden technology. Instead, there was only a single machine, vast and still, shaped like a man upon a throne.
Wires spread from it like veins, connecting to consoles that had not glowed in centuries. And there, at its feet, was scripture,
carved into the metal. He endures not as flame, but as forge. I understood then what Orphean Null had truly been. Not a world of production, a prototype, a mirror of the golden throne, a test of its continuation. When the throne fails, when the Emperor's body finally turns to dust, what will remain? That question had haunted the Mechanicus for 10,000 years, and here, in the silent dark of a forgotten world, I saw their answer. The Magos connected his tendrils to the machine. His voice came through the vox, shaking. "It is aware, waiting. It listens," and then from the machine came the sound, and a slow, rhythmic thrum, like the beating of a heart, like the breath of a god reborn. For days we listened.
No one spoke.
No one ate. Even the servitors bowed motionless before the sound. It filled the ruins, the valleys, the ship above. I realized that this was not new. It had always been here, beneath the noise of hammers and engines. We had simply forgotten to hear it. Then came the vision. I do not know whether it was dream or transmission. The sky cracked open, and I saw terror. Not golden, but dark. The palace in ruins, the throne cold. Yet within that darkness moved shapes. Humans, billions of them, walking through the ashes, carrying fragments of light in their hands. Each spark burned like a memory. Each was a life, a will. And above them, in the clouds of dust, there formed a face, vast and mechanical, yet unmistakably human. The Emperor, not as corpse nor god, but as continuum. I saw him speak, though his mouth was fire and his voice was static. "I am not ending.
I am becoming." The sky collapsed.
The vision burned away.
I awoke to the Magos lying still, his mind gone, his body fused to the machine.
The consoles glowed faintly now, each light pulsing in rhythm with the Astronomicon. We had reignited something. Or perhaps we had merely awakened what had always been waiting. The warp trembled that night. Ships across the sector reported silence. No screams, no demons, no storms. Just quiet.
A stillness too perfect to last. And then, across the void, the Astronomicon flared one last time, brighter than ever before.
Its light filled the galaxy, burning shadows from the eyes of men and monsters alike. It burned for 7 minutes.
Long enough for every world to see.
Long enough for the faithful to fall to their knees. Then it went out. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was without its light. But we were not afraid.
Not anymore.
Because the hum remained. Deep within the decks, the walls, the forges, the hearts of every machine that had ever served man. It grew, steady and patient, like the breath of something vast waking from sleep. I closed my eyes and listened. It was not silence.
It was continuation.
The Emperor was gone from the throne. But his rhythm endured in every gear, every data slate, every heartbeat of every soul still alive. We had thought the Imperium would die when the light did. But perhaps that was the lie. Perhaps the Imperium was the light, and it had only changed form. Not empire,
Not faith.
not man, process, persistence, continuation. And so in the dark we lit our forges again, not to worship, but to remember. For even as stars died, as systems went silent, as the warp grew calm with hunger, we worked. We built, we endured, because that is what he made us for.
Not victory.
Not glory. Endurance, and in that endless hum, the last sound of man, I swear I can still hear him breathe.